A double life with no regrets. Two police officers led a broken Nancy into an interrogation room. It had no windows and a huge two-way mirror on one side. In the middle was a table and two chairs facing each other. On the table were a microphone and a camera. One officer sat her down facing the mirror. She sat down, tears streaming down her face. The two men left the room, and a young woman with a badge hanging from the end of her necklace walked in. "I'm Detective Sarah Lincoln." She sat down across from Nancy. "I know this is a very difficult time for you, but we need to talk about everything, right down to what happened this morning in the parking lot outside the liquor store." "I've already told two officers, Detective. I've been here for 4 hours and I need to get home to my daughter." Nancy stopped talking and cried. The detective turned to the mirror and made a gesture. Just then, an officer came into the room with a box of tissues, placed it on the table next to Nancy, and walked out, closing the door behind him. "My 13-year-old daughter needs me, and I have to go," pleaded Nancy with tears in her eyes. "I completely understand, Mrs. Westford, but there was so much crying and sobbing that the two officers couldn't understand a thing. After you called your parents, they went to your house, and they are with your daughter," the detective said in a soothing voice. "I have a few questions. We need to understand the whole situation." She took Nancy's hand. "This is not an interrogation. Think of it as a conversation between two women." "I understand," Nancy sobbed. "Would you like something to drink, Mrs. Westford? Coffee? Water?" No, thank you. I'm fine. Let's just finish this conversation, please. Where should I start?" Nancy took a tissue from the box and wiped away her tears. "Let's start at the beginning. I was born Nancy Stewart. On my first day of first grade, the teacher made me sit next to Steve Westford. He was a very charming boy. He had interesting school supplies like colorful pens, a pencil with Mickey's head on top, a butterfly-shaped sharpener, and a scented eraser. We became friends, and at lunchtime, we were already sitting together. In the afternoon, when my mom came to pick me up, he ran up to us and gave me a pen. Nancy smiled. My mom was surprised at his kind gesture. She later told me that on my first day of school, I already had an admirer. From then on, we were always together, and all our classes were spent together. Of course, we always sat next to each other. The whole school knew that we were inseparable. We made love together the night of our high school graduation. He was always tender and passionate." "What about both your parents?" "They knew we'd been in love since we were kids, and they were fine with that. We went to college. I chose business administration, and he chose accounting. He was always very good with numbers. After college, he got a job as a junior accountant for a cosmetics company, and I went to work in the administrative department of a supply company. 3 months later, we were married. Steve was the only child in the family, and we stayed with his parents. Steve said we could save money to buy or rent a house when we had children. A year later, Stephanie was born. Steve was the happiest man in the world, and I knew right away that my daughter was going to be Daddy's little girl. After we brought our baby home, he spent most of his time in her room, standing by her crib and either humming or singing. "Was he neglecting you?" Sarah asked. "Oh, no, he was a real gentleman." Nancy cried again. "Be courageous, Mrs. Westford. We had help from my relatives. They watched over Steph. Steve's mom was a housewife. She took care of her when I went back to work. Steve always called his parents by their first names, John and Mary. As Steph got older, she started calling them by their first names, too. A real daddy's girl." "What about your parents?" "They were grandparents. It seemed like life was good. No mortgage, your daughter was looked after by her grandmother, sorry, Mary, a loving husband, and a caring father." "So, what went wrong?" "When I lived with my mother-in-law, it was like I was being watched every time. If I was even 10 minutes late getting home from work, Mary would ask if there was heavy traffic on the road. When I went shopping alone, she asked where I was going and when I'd be back. When I wore a tight dress to work, she would comment on it. It was as if I lived in prison." "Maybe she was overprotective. What about Steve?" Steve is the nicest person I've ever met. He would never say anything that would hurt me. He once told me we were in love before we were born. That's my Steve. Did you ever tell him about his mother watching you? No, never. He was so close to his parents that I never wanted to bring it up. I knew he would immediately find a house and move away from his parents. I didn't want that to happen. Nancy sobbed. He promised to protect me, take care of me, and give me all his love. He always treated me like a queen. Would you like to take a short break, Nancy? Sarah asked in a motherly voice. No, let's get this over with. I need to go home. As you wish. Sarah took a deep breath. What was the turning point? After Steph turned 8, John decided to take early retirement. He bought a 2-bedroom condo in Naples, Florida, near the beach, and left the house to us. We only had to pay utilities and property taxes. John and Mary were still the owners of the house. When they moved out, I felt like I had my freedom again, but it was heartbreaking for Steve and Steph. I started wearing whatever I wanted. When I showed up late at night after work, I didn't have to answer to anyone. My co-workers, who had always invited me to their bachelorette parties and whom I had always turned down before, were shocked when one Friday night I showed up alone at the bar they usually went to. Steve agreed to let you go alone to these parties? Yes, indeed. He loved me so much that he never refused me anything. He trusted me more than anything. There were single and married women in our group. Some were faithful to their boyfriends or husbands, and some were not. Whatever happened during these night outings remained our secret. I always drew a line between myself and the men we met. And then one Friday night I met a married man. We talked, we drank, we danced. On the dance floor, he pulled me tightly against him and I felt attracted. It was exciting. After a couple of dances, he took me outside to his car, which was parked in the far corner. We made love to him. When he pulled me out of the car, I could still feel my heart pounding. He closed the back door, thanking me for the sex. He got in the car and drove off. I went back to the bar. Why did you cheat on your husband? Because I could. It was exciting, and it was just sex. That night when I got home, Steve was already asleep. I looked at him and cried. I promised myself I'd never do it again. Then I remembered that I had already done it at the altar, in God's house, in front of friends and family. That night I couldn't sleep. I hated myself. The next day I couldn't look him in the eye. He asked me if anything bad had happened. I lied. I told him I wasn't feeling well. In fact, I was full of remorse. That night, as a sign of remorse to forgive myself, I almost killed him with sex. When was the next time you cheated on your husband? I stopped going to bachelorette parties. Every time my coworkers invited me, I always found an excuse to decline. About 6 months later, when they begged me to attend that night, one of my coworkers, Carmela, our department manager, intervened on my behalf and told them I wasn't interested and to leave me alone. Later, during lunch, she came over and sat next to me. She was in her early 50s and was already a grandmother. She had never met her coworkers. She asked me the reason I refused to be at the bachelorette party. I replied that I didn't want to cheat on my husband by being alone with other men. The temptation was there, and at any moment I could cross the line. She looked me in the eye and asked me if I had done it before. At that particular moment, I couldn't lie to her. I told her the truth, and how much it hurt. As a mature woman, I hope she gave you good advice, Sarah interjected. Nancy lowered her eyes and shook her head. She took my hand and began to tell me about her life. She had married young. She had 2 daughters, already married, with children. Later, she started to feel old, which she couldn't accept. She started wearing tight dresses with cleavage, putting on a lot of makeup and styling her hair like young girls. Her husband was good with that. Still, she was not satisfied. One Saturday afternoon, after shopping, she was in a cafe and a young man in his early 20s was sitting next to her. After she finished her coffee, he didn't hesitate to ask her if she wanted to have a little fun. Stunned at first, she smiled and asked if he knew of a secluded spot. The young man went with her in her car and showed her an underground parking garage where there were no cameras. He made love to her twice in the back seat. They started seeing each other regularly, and after 6 months, he brought a friend and later another. So far, she'd had lovers who were just over 20. Her husband never noticed this? She's very careful. I asked her if she regrets anything. She told me that she only loved her husband, and with her young lovers, she only had sex. She also said that if her husband didn't know about it, it wouldn't hurt him. Oh my God! Don't tell me you let her influence you! Unfortunately, yes. The hen party started again, but this time I wasn't alone. Steve thought I was with my coworkers. I only chose to make love to married men because, apparently, they cheat on their wives and keep it a secret. You can't imagine how many of them are out there trying their luck to sleep with other women. As long as there is supply, there will be demand, Sarah observed. I always ended relationships after 7 to 8 months. Nancy ignored Sarah's sarcasm. I was afraid that a long-term relationship would jeopardize my married life. And at the same time, I wanted to get to know different types of men. After one lover, I would pause for 2 or 3 months and then look for another. Where did you meet them? As I mentioned earlier, these married men are everywhere. You can find them in every bar. We made love in motels on Saturdays, and when I went shopping alone, leaving Steve at home to take care of Stephanie and household chores, and during my bachelorette parties or during long lunches at work. Sometimes, after work, we'd have quick sex in the back seat of my car. You were very busy. Were you never tired when you got home? How could you lead your double life without regrets? I was used to it. However, I never denied Steve anything. And there were no problems? Yeah, until I met Lou about 6 months ago. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah shook her head. Tell me how it all started with Mr. Cypher, Lou Cypher, didn't it? Yes. I was in the supermarket one Saturday, and as I bent down to grab a bottle of juice from the bottom shelf, I felt someone hit me from behind. I turned around in shock. It was Lou. He said he was sorry and that he had tripped over something. There was no one in the aisle at that particular moment. There was no one to confirm if it was a deliberate action or not. He then walked away with a smile. As I walked to my car in the parking lot, I couldn't stop thinking about this guy. As I was about to get into my car, he came up to me out of nowhere and apologized again. I told him it was an accident and everything was fine. He asked me out for coffee and I told him I was married and showed him my ring finger. He said that didn't stop him. He wrote his name and phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. He asked me to call him whenever I wanted to talk to a friend. And you didn't throw away the piece of paper with the phone number on it, did you? No. All day and the rest of the week I thought about him. That Friday I led myself into temptation. I called him. He was expecting my call. We arranged to meet the next day at his house. He gave me the address. I had never met my lovers at their places for obvious reasons. It was exciting to have sex with someone in his own bed. At the same time, I was going against my rules and beliefs about single men. I decided to give it a try. We met on Saturday, and the first thing I told him was that he should wear protection. He grumbled a bit and then complied. He accepted my terms. Oh. So it wasn't a one-time affair? Nancy shook her head. No. We continued to date as I had with my previous lovers. After about 3 months, I noticed that he was getting a little possessive. One night during my bachelorette party, he begged me to spend the night with him as he wanted me to wake up in his arms the next morning. Did you really say yes? How could I? Then he wanted to meet on a more regular basis, which I refused. Then he gave me a powder and told me to put it in Steve's drink during dinner. I did, and he slept like a dead man. Then he came to me at night and made love to me in my bed with my husband sleeping next to me. It was crazy, and I told him I would never do anything like that again. It was then that I decided to distance myself from him. I stopped seeing him during lunch or after work. I made all kinds of excuses. We met after 3 missed Saturdays. He wasn't happy. He was annoyed and made love to me so much that it hurt me. After the second round, he asked me to cut Steve off from sex. What did you do? Steve was my man. I belonged to him. I stopped seeing Lou for almost a month. He kept calling and texting me. Every once in a while, I would text him back to say that I was busy and that he had hurt me so badly last time that I still hadn't recovered. He apologized and even sent me flowers to my office. Then last Saturday, I wanted to meet him one last time and tell him that it was over between us. Besides, I realized that I had gone too far in my cheating and it was time to end it. This would be my last date, and after that, I would be the best wife a husband could have. Nancy took her eyes off Sarah. At that moment, hundreds of thoughts were running through her head. As usual, we met at his house, Nancy continued. He put his arm around my waist and tried to force me into his bed. I struggled and managed to jump out of bed. He grabbed my hand and dragged me back on the bed with force. I kicked him really hard in the groin. He let go of me and squirmed in pain. I immediately grabbed my cell phone that was on the nightstand. I told him I would dial 911 if he kept trying to use me. He didn't answer. He was moaning in the fetal position. I yelled at him that I didn't want to see him again. I quickly put on my dress and walked out of his house. Did he try to contact you after that? No, all week he didn't contact me until this morning. Nancy took a deep breath and shook her head. After about 10 missed calls from him, I blocked his number. Then he called my home phone. I don't know how he got my home phone number. I never gave it to him. Maybe, without your knowledge, he got it from the contact list in your cell phone. Maybe he did, probably when I was in the bathroom. Steve went to the liquor store to buy some wine. Tonight he wanted to surprise his daughter and me with a wine dinner and tiramisu for dessert. Steph picked up the phone and Lou gave his full name and said he was a co-worker of mine and needed to discuss an important file with me. She told him that I was busy and would call him back later. After she informed me of Lou, I asked my daughter to go and clean her room. I know she always turned up the music louder when doing this. I then went down to the basement and called him from my cell phone. Nancy fell silent and stared at the floor. What did he say? Sarah asked after a pause. He asked me to come to his house immediately or he would inform Steve of my affair. I immediately replied that I intended to inform my husband of my infidelity. I told him that Steve loved me so much that he would forgive me. We would go to therapy together and I would never look at another man again. Steve would be the only one who would be with me until death do us part. Nancy sobbed and wiped away her tears. Then he said something that scared me. What was it? Sarah frowned. He said that Steve certainly liked wine and that he had good taste. I froze in place. I was at a loss for words. Then he continued by saying that if he couldn't have me, no one else would have me either. Then I heard 2 gunshots and people screaming. I panicked. I shouted questions to him about what was going on. What were those gunshots I heard? What did he do? There was no answer until I heard the car door close. He said the same thing, that if he couldn't get me, no one else could. Then I heard a single gunshot. I panicked. I got in my car and raced to the liquor store. When I got there, the police had already wrapped yellow tape around the crime scene. I found my Steve dead in the parking lot with 2 holes in his chest. Nancy burst into tears. Lou Cypher was found dead in his car near the crime scene with a hole in the back of his head. Apparently, he had shot himself in the mouth. Sarah took Nancy's hand. You have a daughter to take care of. She turned to the mirror and nodded. Your parents are waiting in the waiting room. Come on, I'll walk you to them. Walking down the hallway, Sarah stopped Nancy. According to what you said, Steve was a very good husband and father. He loved his family. He was a good cook, did the chores, looked after the yard and the house. He gave you complete freedom. He was a reliable and perfect husband that any woman would dream of, and yet you cheated on him. It was a mistake. A fatal mistake. Sarah gave Nancy a squeamish look, turned and walked away. Nancy ran up to her parents and hugged them. They were all crying. "Did you leave Steph home alone?" Nancy asked. Steve's parents, John and Mary, had arrived an hour earlier. Steph called them and they took the next available flight out. "Let's go home." Both of her parents took Nancy's hands and led her out of the station. When they got to the house, some of Stephanie's friends were there. Nancy saw John and Mary. They didn't smile at her. "I need to see Stephanie. Where is she?" Nancy asked. "She is in her room with her friends," answered Mary. At the same time, Steph came down the stairs, accompanied by her friends. Looking at her, Nancy realized that she had been crying for hours. "John," shouted Steph, "throw that cheating woman out of your house!" She turned to Nancy and said with hatred, "You killed my father, you traitor!" "No!" Nancy exclaimed. "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, you fool. It's all over the news, on the internet, on social media." Stephanie spat out, "A man killed his mistress's husband and then killed himself." They were all stunned by Steph's reaction. Her friends tried to calm her down, but to no avail. Steph approached John and Mary. "John, I don't want to see her anymore. Just tell her to go away." "Please, Steph," Nancy pleaded. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. "My father died without knowing that his loving wife was a cheat and a liar. My father was killed without knowing why. He was killed without knowing that the one who pulled the trigger was his wife's lover. He died without knowing he was a cuckold. It is a tragedy, and we are all in distress." Grandpa tried to calm the situation. "Let's take care of what needs to be taken care of first, and then we can work on our problems later." "With that cheating woman by my side, no way." "Please, Steph, don't say those words towards your mother," Grandma said. "Let her do the talking," John shouted. Mary took his hand and pulled him to her. "Mary, we lost our son today because of that fool." Steph's friends apologized and headed for the door. "Your daughter is a cheating fool," John continued. "You know it, we know it, and the whole world found out after my only son was murdered. Usually children have to bury their parents. Today, we parents have to bury our son." "John, I want my father to be buried where you live now, in Naples." Everyone turned to Stephanie. "You still know a lot of people in this town," Steph continued. "You still have some connections. Get in touch with the right people to get this done. And most importantly, contact a lawyer to get all the paperwork ready for my adoption." "Please, Steph, don't do something you'll regret later," Grandpa begged. "Please, you can't do this to me," Nancy screamed. "I can't live in the same house with that cheating fool. I can't breathe the same air with her. She disgusts me. I don't want to see her face again." Steph turned to John. "Ask her to leave, please." "We're your grandparents too," Grandma cried. "You are part of our lives. Grandma, Grandpa, I love you with all my heart. I respect you and will never forget what you did for me. But your daughter is a cheater and I can't stand her. I'm a Westford and I belong to the Westford family. You're taking me to school on Monday, John. I'll need my papers to transfer to another school in Naples." "I'll do that, of course." John pulled Steve to him and hugged her. "You'll also need to sell this house. There are too many memories." Steph wiped away her tears. "Nancy, take whatever you want from this house," John said imperiously. "We'll donate the rest to charity." Stephanie moved to Naples, Florida. She never forgave Nancy. She only talked to her grandparents when they called. Once a week, she visited Steve's grave. John and Mary were now her parents. Nancy started seeing a psychiatrist, but after a couple months, things got worse. She had to be admitted to a mental institution. Her doctor begged Steph to see her mother only once and to forgive her. This would help Nancy in her recovery. Steph flatly refused. On the morning of Steph's 18th birthday, a nurse found Nancy's motionless body in her bed and a pool of blood on the floor. She had slit her wrists during the night. Stephanie refused to attend the funeral. Yes, fraud always has a price. The end! Subscribe to my channel! Thank you.